It's 2:47 a.m. Your eyes just open, no alarm went off, no sound woke you, you're just awake, staring at the ceiling. Your first thought is probably, something's wrong with me. Maybe you reach for your phone. Maybe you scroll for a few minutes, annoyed, waiting to feel tired again. Here's what nobody tells you. That exact moment, wide awake, alone in the dark, somewhere between midnight and dawn, is something your ancestors experienced almost every single night. Not for a few years, for roughly 300,000 years. Before we go further, if stories like this pull you in, hit subscribe now, because this channel rebuilds the hidden science behind how ancient humans actually lived, one video at a time. And if you've ever woken up in the middle of the night wondering why, drop a comment below. You might be surprised how many people share that exact experience. Now, back to the dark. Think about how much artificial light surrounds you right now. Phone screens, street lights, the soft glow leaking under your bedroom door. You are almost never in true darkness. Your ancestors were constantly. For nearly half of their entire existence on this planet, humans lived inside a darkness so complete that the only light came from the moon, the stars, or a small fire they had to keep alive by hand. So here's the real question. What did they do with all of that time? Hour after hour, night after night, trapped between sunset and sunrise, with no electricity, no screens, nothing to fill the silence but firelight and each other. The answer isn't just survival, it's something closer to the origin of who you are today, how your brain processes fear, how stories get passed down, and why that 2:47 a.m. wake up might not be a malfunction at all. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at a sleepless night the same way again. And if this kind of deep dive is your thing, share it with someone who's also a night owl. They're going to want to see this. Let's go back further than that dark bedroom. Let's go back about 1,000,000 years, to a limestone cave in South Africa called Wonderwork. Inside that cave, archaeologists found something small but staggering. Burned bone fragments and ash, sitting in layers so deep underground that sunlight never reaches them. This is some of the earliest solid evidence we have of humans controlling fire. Not just surviving a lightning strike, controlling it, keeping it alive. Now picture what came before that moment. Before fire, your ancestors were just another primate on the savannah. And like every other primate, they lived by one unbreakable rule. When the sun goes down, you disappear. You climb, you hide, you freeze in place. Because human eyes are almost useless in true darkness. We don't have the reflective layer behind our retinas that lets a leopard's eyes glow in headlights. We don't have a hyena's nose that can track blood from half a mile away. In the dark, we are, frankly, prey. So imagine sitting on open ground, night falling fast, and somewhere out there, something with better eyes and sharper teeth is already awake and already hunting. That was the deal for millions of years. Then fire changed it. A burning fire doesn't just produce light, it pushes a boundary outward into the dark. A rough buffer zone stretching maybe a few dozen feet in every direction, just enough that most predators would rather not test it. Researchers who study ancient campsites believe this glow effectively became the first safe room in human history. Not a cave wall, not a cliffside, a circle of light you could carry with you. And here's the part that's easy to miss. Fire didn't just protect people, it gave them time. Actual, usable hours that used to belong entirely to the dark. Estimates suggest controlled fire handed early humans somewhere between 2 and 4 extra hours of productive time every single day. That might not sound dramatic, but stretch that across generations, across hundreds of thousands of nights, and you're not just talking about staying warm, you're talking about a full rewiring of how human life was structured. Time to process food that used to be inedible raw. Time to make tools by touch, near the coals. Time to simply exist together, awake, without immediately dying. It's strange to think about, but we treat having an evening as something so basic it doesn't even register. You get home, you have hours left before bed, and you don't think twice about it. For most of human history, those hours didn't exist. They had to be invented, and they were invented with fire. Now picture yourself there for a second. You're sitting close to the flames, knees pulled in, the cold pressing in just past the edge of the light. Somewhere out in that blackness, something is moving. But for now, you're inside the circle. You're safe. And for the first time in the story of our species, that safety came with something extra. time to fill with more than just fear. That extra time is exactly where the next part of this story begins. So what did people actually do with those extra hours? This is where the story gets genuinely surprising. Anthropologist Polly Weissner spent years studying the Juhuansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last hunter-gatherer societies on Earth whose way of life still echoes patterns stretching back tens of thousands of years. In a study published in PNAS in 2014, she did something almost nobody had done before. She actually recorded and compared what people talked about during the day versus what they talked about at night, around the fire. The difference was staggering. During daylight hours, conversation was almost entirely practical. Complaints, gossip, logistics, who did what, who owes who, where the food is. Roughly the same kind of small talk you'd overhear at any office on a Tuesday afternoon. But at night, once the fire was lit and the work was done, something shifted. Story content jumped dramatically, making up the vast majority of nighttime conversation. Myths, legends, tales about ancestors, spirits, distant lands, impossible events. Weissner's interpretation is that Firelight didn't just extend the day, it created something new. A space specifically built for imagination. A place where humans, for the first time, had the mental bandwidth to talk about things that weren't right in front of them. Things that didn't exist. Things that might have happened long ago, or might never have happened at all. Think about what that actually requires. To tell a story about an ancestor who died decades earlier, you need memory. To describe a spirit no one has seen, you need imagination. To make a room full of people laugh, or gasp, or lean in closer, you need something almost theatrical. Some researchers describe the ancient campfire as humanity's first stage, first classroom, and first place of worship, all folded into the same flickering circle. Now, it's worth being honest here. This is an interpretation, a compelling one, backed by real data, but still a reading of what Firelight conversation might represent for our deep ancestors. We can't rewind a tape from 300,000 years ago. What we can say is that in the closest living cultural analog we have, darkness plus fire consistently produces something that looks a lot like the birth of storytelling. And that matters more than it might seem. A story is portable knowledge. It's a way of handing down a warning about a dangerous river, a lesson about which plants will kill you, or a memory of a person who is no longer alive, all without writing a single word down. Long before anyone could read, humans were already building libraries. They just kept them in each other's heads and opened them every night by firelight. But storytelling wasn't the only thing happening once the flames died down and people finally closed their eyes. Because it turns out, the way your ancestors slept wasn't like the way you sleep at all. Somewhere in that long stretch of darkness after the stories ended, something strange happened in the middle of nearly every single night. A gap. A pause, a window of quiet wakefulness that modern humans have almost completely forgotten existed. And that gap might explain exactly why you were staring at your ceiling at 2:47 a.m. In the early 1990s, a historian named Roger Ekirch stumbled onto something odd while digging through old court records, and it ended up consuming 16 years of his life. He kept finding casual references to something called first sleep and second sleep, not as a medical term, just as an ordinary part of how people described their nights, the way you'd mention breakfast or lunch. Court testimonies, medical journals, diaries, prayer manuals, even Homer's Odyssey contained phrasing that lined up perfectly with this pattern. By the time Ekirch finished, he had pulled together more than 500 references, all pointing to the same basic structure. Here's how it worked. People went to bed shortly after dark and slept for roughly 4 hours. Then they woke up, not from a nightmare, not from noise, just naturally, the way you might wake up right on time without an alarm. They stayed awake for maybe 1 to 2 hours. Then they drifted into a second 4-hour block of sleep until morning. And that middle window wasn't treated as some kind of problem to fix, it was treated as normal, useful time. A 16th century French physician actually advised couples that this quiet stretch of the night was an ideal time to conceive a child, since both partners were rested and unhurried. Other records describe people using the time to visit neighbors, tend a fire, interpret a dream they just had, write letters, or simply lie in the dark thinking. What's almost funnier is how completely this got erased from history. For centuries, historians and translators ran into phrases like first sleep and quietly assumed it was a scribe's error or an old-fashioned figure of speech and smoothed it over in translation. Nobody was lying, it just didn't occur to anyone that people used to sleep in two separate chunks, because by the time those historians were writing, nobody around them slept that way anymore. Now, it's important to be careful with how far we stretch this. Ekirch's 500 documents are overwhelmingly European, mostly from the pre-industrial era, not direct evidence stretching back through the full 300,000 years of human evolution. We can't say with certainty that a hunter-gatherer 40,000 years ago experienced sleep in exactly this way. What we can say is that this is the clearest trace we have of what human sleep looked like before artificial light rewired it, and it lines up strikingly with what firelit, sunset to sunrise nights would naturally produce. So if segmented sleep really was close to the historical norm, that raises an obvious question. Was this just some old cultural habit people picked up? Or is there something in the human body itself, something biological, that would produce this same pattern even today if you simply took the lights away? Someone actually tested that, and the results were almost too perfect. In 1992, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware ran an experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health that sounds almost too simple to matter. He took a group of people and removed one single thing from their lives: artificial light in the evening. For an entire month, participants spent 14 hours a day in darkness, roughly matching the long nights our ancestors would have experienced before electricity. No lamps, no screens, no street light leaking through curtains, just genuine extended darkness, night after night. Nobody told them how to sleep. Nobody handed them a schedule or explained Ekirch's research. They were simply left alone with the dark. And within a matter of weeks, every single participant fell into the exact same pattern. 4 hours of sleep, a period of quiet wakefulness, then another 4 hours of sleep. The same first sleep, second sleep structure that had shown up in 500 pieces of historical evidence reappearing on its own in a modern research lab, with modern people who had never slept that way before in their lives. But here's the detail that turns this from interesting into remarkable. During that quiet waking window, researchers measured a sharp rise in prolactin, a hormone associated with calm, and with the kind of relaxed, floating mental state you'd normally associate with deep meditation. This wasn't restless tossing and turning. It wasn't insomnia. It was a distinct, measurable state of quiet alertness, one that modern humans almost never experience anymore, because we simply never give our bodies the darkness required to produce it. So this middle of the night waking period isn't a broken gap in your sleep, it looks like a built-in biological state, something your body still knows how to do, sitting dormant most nights because modern life never lets the dark get dark enough or last long enough to trigger it. Which brings us to something worth sitting with for a second. That state, an ancient, calm, meditative form of consciousness humans lived inside every single night for hundreds of thousands of years, has essentially vanished from modern life. Not because our biology changed, because the conditions required to switch it on disappeared. And if you're wondering how something that ordinary, that universal, could just quietly disappear from the human experience, the answer isn't really a mystery. We know exactly when it happened, and we know exactly what we traded it for. For most of human history, night wasn't just dark. It was dangerous, restricted, and in many places, illegal to wander through unprepared. Then, in the late 1600s, something started under King Louis XIV in Paris. The city began installing lanterns along its streets, one of the first large-scale attempts to push artificial light into public darkness. London followed. Other cities followed London. Slowly, the edges of the night started getting eaten away. For a long time, this progress moved at a human pace, slow enough that people's bodies could keep adjusting alongside it. Candles got a little cheaper, lanterns got a little brighter, but the real break came in the 1800s, when gas lighting spread through cities, turning entire streets into something that stayed lit long after sunset. And then in 1879, Thomas Edison's light bulb arrived, and after that, darkness stopped being the default setting of nighttime altogether. Here's what's wild about the timeline. 300,000 years of of near total darkness, and it took roughly one generation, for that entire world to disappear. There's actually a leftover word that proves how seriously people used to take the dark. The word curfew comes from the French phrase couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. In medieval towns, this wasn't a suggestion, it was law. At a set hour, everyone was required to smother their fires, and once that fire went out, the streets belonged to the night. Wandering around after that point wasn't just unwise, it was often associated with crime, or worse, considered an invitation for whatever superstition said was lurking out there. Darkness, in other words, used to have teeth. It was regulated, feared, legislated against. People organized entire legal systems around making sure it stayed contained behind closed doors. And now look at us. We've gone from a species that once passed laws to physically extinguish fire before nightfall, to a species that quietly panics the second a phone battery drops below 20%. Same fundamental fear of the dark, wearing a very different outfit. We didn't just add light to our nights, we erased the boundary that used to separate day from night entirely. And erasing that boundary didn't come free. It came with a cost your body is still quietly paying every single night, whether you notice it or not. Here's what that cost actually looks like today. The average person now gets 7 to 8 hours of artificial light exposure after sunset alone. Lamps, TVs, phone screens, all pouring light into hours that used to belong entirely to darkness. And your brain, frankly, isn't sophisticated enough to tell the difference. As far as your biology is concerned, a light bulb and the sun are sending the exact same signal. Stay awake, stay alert, daytime isn't over yet. The mechanism behind this comes down to one hormone, melatonin, the chemical your brain releases to signal that it's time to wind down. Blue-toned light, the kind that pours out of nearly every screen in your house, actively suppresses melatonin production. So even when you're lying in bed, exhausted, your brain may still be chemically convinced it's the middle of the afternoon. But here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Researchers have tested what happens when modern people go without artificial light entirely, even just for a week. Out camping, no phones, no screens, nothing but sunlight and firelight. And the results are almost immediate. Melatonin levels reset to a natural, pre-industrial rhythm in about 2 hours. 2 hours. Not months, not years of therapy or medication, 2 hours without artificial light. And a body shaped by 300,000 years of darkness remembers exactly what to do. If you've ever wondered why a weekend camping trip leaves you falling asleep at 9 p.m. and waking up genuinely refreshed, this is why. You didn't fix anything. You just gave your ancient biology back the one ingredient it's been missing this whole time. Real, uninterrupted dark. And that brings us back to that moment you started this video with. So let's go back to 2:47 a.m. You, staring at the ceiling, wide awake for no obvious reason. Maybe that's not a malfunction at all. Maybe it's not insomnia, not stress, not something broken in you that needs fixing. Maybe it's a program written into your biology hundreds of thousands of years before the word sleep disorder ever existed. A quiet, calm window your ancestors used to fill with conversation, or a half-remembered dream, or simply the sound of a fire settling into its coals. Your ancestors didn't just endure the dark, they built something inside it. Every myth passed down by firelight, every story that taught the next generation which plant heals and which one kills, every quiet hour of waking stillness in the middle of the night. All of it happened because darkness once had room to breathe. We traded that room away for convenience, one light bulb at a time. And somewhere underneath the melatonin, the screens, and the 7-hour scroll before bed, your body still remembers the old rhythm. So next time you wake up in the dead of night for no reason at all, don't reach for your phone right away. Just lie there for a minute. You might be the closest you've been all day to how your ancestors actually lived.